Okay, good morning. Thank you for attending to this second plenary session. Sorry for the delay. Today we are very lucky because we have here Silke Snev. We are very pleased that you accepted our invitation to be our keynote speaker. For those of you who don't know Silke, I must say that she's a senior researcher in the Competence Center of Microeconomic Evaluation of the European Commission Joint Center in Italy. Previously, she worked also as a consultant for the Innocenti Research Center, also in Italy, and as associate professor in social statistics at the University of Southampton in the United Kingdom. And she obtained previously a master in political sciences, psychology and law, and a PhD in economics in Germany. She provides scientific expertise and methodological support for counterfactual impact evaluation. Her main research is focused on impact evaluation methods and survey design. Actually, that's the topic of her presentation today. And she has published many papers in top journals like Journal of the Royal Statistical Society, Journal of Population Economics, Economics of Education Review, Oxford Review of Education, or International Journal of Educational Development. We are sure that we will have a very interesting presentation. The title is Reflections on the Accuracy of Educational Achievement Data. So we have around 1 hour, maybe a little bit more. So you can present for around 40 minutes or something like that. So we can have 45, and we have some time for questions at the end. Okay? Thank you.
Is it working or not? No. Yeah? Okay. Okay. Oh, no, I think that's fine. Thank you. And this works like if I want to make it. Okay. Okay. Hola, muchas gracias por invitarme de hablar aquí. Es un gran placer, sobre todo porque he estado en algunas conferencias de esa asociación. Así lo he visto crecer, es un gran placer de ser parte de eso. So, hello to everybody. On the 3rd of December this year, the PISA results will come out, showing the ranking of different countries in terms of their educational achievements. So it's also called the Educational Olympics. And I'm sure that some countries will read the results. So what does this talk about? I will reflect on educational achievement surveys in general, because in some way these kind of educational achievement rankings that in some way impacts on how countries see their educational achievement, whether they are now going up in the league table or down in the league table, how much do we actually know that this reflects changes in education systems? Just be aware that the wave before was just 3 years earlier. Or could there be other things that are related to the design or survey errors or something like that? So this talk is about reflecting about accuracy of educational achievement data. So the outline of the talk is that I will first talk about educational achievement data and the league tables, which always attract the attention in the media, right? Then I will show you the policy relevance of educational achievement data of PISA, and from that I will extract the necessity to have really lots of transparency on how the achievement scores are created and possible kind of survey errors. So with errors here, I don't mean errors in colloquial sense, but I mean something like the deviation of what you measure to what you wanted to measure, okay? And then there is some information on how good the surveys are. You know, there is information on different kind of possible errors that might change the estimates that we receive, right? But this information is very scattered around at different places. So you might find something hidden in the PISA report there or technical report. And then there are also some researchers who fortunately now start examining this in detail. So, but that's very difficult to give us an overall view on what possible kind of things we need to think about when we consider the accuracy of league table data, education achievement scores. So what I propose is to use survey methodology, okay, to reflect about errors. So survey methodology tries to understand at what different processes of the survey error can come up to. And I will hence talk you then systematically through some kind of survey errors that we can possibly find. And conclude. So I'm very brief here, so on educational achievement surveys, because I'm sure that all of you in some way have met them somewhere. So there's PISA, which I think is the most famous one, focusing on 15-year-olds. It's conducted every 3 years, organized by the OECD. Then there's PEARLS and TIMSS, and all these surveys share a very similar design. They are stratified, clustered, probabilistic samples. So first what happens, first school gets selected based on stratification variables, and then we have students within schools being selected. Then these students all get something like booklets, they get questions, okay? And then this produces the so-called raw scores. It means whether an answer was answered, so a question was answered right or wrongly, okay? And then these data get modeled, okay? Psychometric modeling, so that's quite a complicated thing with item response models, okay? And then every student gets a score. Sometimes it's imputed because not all students sit all subjects, okay? But you get always a score for each of the subjects of the set. So some of them are imputed and modeled in some way. And then we have a student score, and then the student score averaged across the country gives us the number that's shown in the league table. Okay, so PISA, given that it's the most important one, it differs a bit to TIMSS because instead of examining whether it is what students learned, it examines how good they can use what they've learned in real life situations. Okay, so they focused mainly on reading, science, and math, but also add new innovative domains, have added these innovative domains. It is huge. It is huge, there's no question. It is now, the 2018 covers 500,000 of students in 80 countries. And what is really incredible about educational achievement surveys is that they have this contextual information. So we have questionnaire on the children's socioeconomic background, their motivation, their aspirations, their expectations. We have information from school questionnaires, so that we know something about school resources. And we have also, for some countries, it's voluntary, information on parents as well as information from teachers. Okay, so I think this survey is really incredible, and it has revolutionized what we can say and examine about education. May I just ask you, how many of you have ever worked with microdata from educational achievement surveys? If you can put your hand up. Okay, so let's say it's a third, between a third and a quarter of you. That's quite loud, right? Okay, so that's the surveys. Just to give you an example, this is an example question that I found in the released field trial. It's from the released 2018 field trial. So what you see here, it's an online forum question, right? And can you hear me also, is this? Yeah, okay. And you get asked, the student gets asked whether a post is relevant for the question or not. So that's how it looks like. From that, you have the raw data, and then they get modeled into a league table, like here. So that is a league table of 2015. So you see here the countries at the top, sometimes called the global reference countries. Finland was it for a very long time, so we find books about what lessons can be learned from PISA, or what lessons can be learned from Finland about education systems. I think this league table has several kind of problems, because this is what you will find in the newspaper. This is really attracting the main attention. And one is that you have these country rankings, and you see, I'm a statistician, so that is a typical statistician comment. You see that some of these values are very, very similar, right? And you have a standard error attached to them. So while you have here the impression these countries are one under the other, and hence one is better than the other, in actual terms, statistically, they are not, because the standard error is around 3 or something like that. So some of the countries have not statistically significant differences. Okay, so there are also other kind of problems you could connect with the league tables. Sorry. And that is the following, which I think is the main point. So if you think here that each of these numbers is based on a very complex design, there is a number. It's a simplified number on the complex design. It can be in some way used for what the users want to use it. So there is, for example, the book by Theodore Porter in 1990, which he wrote in 95, Trust in Numbers, and it says quantification is a way of making decisions without seeming to decide. Objectivity lends authority to officials who have very little of their own. Okay. I saw another kind of representation of the league tables, which I think perhaps is a quite interesting one, to show regional data on the league tables. Because in some way then you don't see this exact ranking which suggests that it can easily be done. However, what I found interesting in this pickup by a journalist is that we have here 3-digit numbers and then 1 decimal place. That there is really this huge accuracy with this data. Okay, so what can we say about PISA? What I find really interesting is its huge policy impact. PISA, if you go on the OECD side of the PISA organizers, what you will find there written is PISA publishes the results of the test a year after the students are tested to help governments shape their education policy. So they really intend to shape education policy, and this is really what they do, okay? So the publication of PISA results sometimes are something like an external shock that opens up a window for policy making. And that is exactly what has happened in 2000 in Germany. So the German people, I'm German, we were quite concerned, wow, education in Germany is so bad. And in addition, compared to other countries, right? And in addition, we have the highest educational inequalities in Europe. So something needs to be done. And indeed, in Germany, a lot of things were done. So if you now look at Germany, if you can say that there's one winner over the last waves of PISA, it is Germany, because its educational inequality declined and its educational achievement increased compared to other countries. And there were lots of education reforms in Germany. So I doubt this would not have happened with PISA. But there are also other countries where you can find that, so Denmark, Japan, and England. And some countries introduced obligatory national tests for all students in the country, and some of them are in some way similar to the PISA design. Okay, I want to give you one example from England, and some of the things I say here from a very nice paper by John Jerome. So here you see the English PISA mean scores in science and reading, right? And just imagine we are now in 2010 when the results were released. So you see that this decline, okay? So it is important to bear in mind that until 2010 in England you had a party in place into education. It's also important to bear in mind that the national assessment scores, the so-called GCSE, showed over the same time an increase in students' outcomes, right? And in addition, if you look at TIMSS result, they also showed an increase in the results. So it was only PISA that showed decline. So what still happened, if you think about there was in 2011 debate, Michael Gove, saying, oh, so if you think now about the standard of education, which is offered to young people in these countries, it declined relative to our international competitors. Literacy down, reading down, maths down, okay? So just to give you an example how these scores can be used, but also I told you a lot of policy relevance behind that. So, but it's not only that PISA is policy relevant, but it also serves as a benchmark for seeing how good educational systems are. Me being from the European Commission, there is the framework of European cooperation in education and training, which has a PISA indicator. It says by 2020, we want that all European countries have a lower share, have less than 15% of students being below PISA level 2, okay? But there are also national education targets, so the Australians and Danish people, they want to be among the top 5 PISA countries, Wales top 20. And there are also other countries who choose a specific PISA score that they want to reach. So I show you that because I'm not aware of any other survey that is so important, that can shape policy so much and that serves as a shock to opening up policies. So, sorry, did I now do something wrong? So certainly the survey has also been repeatedly subject to criticism, and I think the quintessence, the biggest one, was a letter written by 80 scientists to Andreas Schleicher, the director of the OECD program, and some of the criticisms, for example, was that PISA has gained so much political power that it can use in its neoliberal framing, for example. That's something that economists are not saying. Thank you. concerned about, but something that education scientists are very much concerned about. Then there's also the discussion that PISA in some way only measures a specific kind of education. It doesn't cover all different kind of possible subjects that might be very important to judge on education. And another point is that this concept of Bildung, okay, emancipation, is so much broader than just thinking about educating students to achieve in a labor market. Okay. So what is the motivation for this talk? The motivation for this talk is that I hope that I managed to convince you up to now that educational achievement surveys are different and that they're very, very important and that they have a big impact on policy design. As such, what we need to ask for is to increase standards that need to be met in terms of data quality and transparency. And with transparency, I also mean that we know that all the designers, test designers' decisions that most of us probably are unaware of, that we have documentation on how these choices impact on the results, for example, the league tables that we see. However, as I said, achievement surveys are very, very complex. And hence, how can we now reflect on that? And for that, I introduce you to survey methodology. Okay. The total survey error framework. Anyone has seen this before? May I ask you? No? No? So, okay. So, what you see here is the different stages of error. There are different stages of a survey where errors can turn up. So, if you open up, this applies to every survey, okay? Not only PISA, it applies to every survey. And if you open up any report, you get an estimate, and to this estimate, an error. Our standard error is attributed to. So what you see is there, the sampling error. That is what we know. The other errors there is all things we never know about, okay? But as I said, I think it's worthwhile to reflect about it. And there are errors on the measurement side, so and there are errors on the representation side. So we do not really have the target population represented in our sample as we want to have them. Okay? So, why should we reflect on these other errors? Is a standard error not enough? No, not really. Because if all these errors are bigger than the standard error, then we have a huge error around our estimate about which we do not know very much. That can impact on the league table, it can impact time trends, and it can be also different for different groups. I'm not talking about this, but that's important to bear in mind. So what I want to do now, and is really to talk you through these different errors, to give you examples from the literature, from the reports, to tell you what these errors are and how we could connect that to PISA. And the idea behind that is, do we really know all these errors? Well, is the information enough we have in order to be completely sure that a leak or something should drive policies or not? Would we perhaps like to know more? Okay, so I start on the measurement side, and that is something that economists also might not be so concerned with, but this is validity. It is the extent to which the measure reflects the underlying construct. For example, for my first year daughter, 2 + 3 is a good measure of her math ability, but we know it wouldn't be valid for a student in the 15s who's 15-year-old. So what is the construct of PISA? It is how well young adults at age 15 and therefore approaching the end of compulsory schooling are prepared to meet the challenges of today's knowledge society's PISA life skill approach. So that's a PISA life skill approach. And there are many things. I mean, if you go through the literature, there are many people talking about the validity and problems. One thing constantly is the measurement. So specific measurement is used across all countries. So that assumes that the life skills in Germany are exactly the same life skills as in Singapore or in Peru. And that's exactly what the OECD says. That's its purpose. We want to have evidence based on the experience of students across the world. And we do want to blend out all the cultural factors. So it depends all on all of you, your own personal judgment, whether you believe that that's possible or not. Whether you think that this is a valid approach or not. So the critics certainly say that ignoring the great diversity of curriculum across participating countries is considered a problem. Okay. What's the next one? So the next one's the measurement error. So all of you know the measurement error. So if someone knocks at your door and asks you, have you consumed any drugs over the last 2 weeks, you're very unlikely to say, yes, I did. Right? So there would be a big measurement error across the population on this kind of measure. Right? And there are other measurement errors you can bear in mind. So with PISA, it would be the language, right? You need to transfer the same questions into different languages, and they do a lot of pilot testing on that. But imagine just the word of fairness. You cannot easily translate it into other languages. Yes? Another problem that could come up is the following. So the Abu Dhabi pupils prepare for PISA 2018. So nearly 21,000 pupils will sit for a 2-hour mock examination on Tuesday as part of the Department of Education and Knowledge's 100-day plan to prepare them for PISA. So probably these students will have a bigger achievement, right? There will be probably some effect. But does this effect then really reflect higher ability of the students? Or does it reflect that the students have learned how to comply with a test, okay? Because PISA is a specific kind of test form, and it could be that they have just learned how to deal with it better than those students who were not working with that before. That would be a typical measurement error. Okay, another point of the measurement error, and that is perhaps a more complicated one to think about, but one very is the item response model. So, people in 2012 used the one-parameter model. So, as I said in the past, these are the models that are to transform the raw scores into the proficiency estimate for each student. So they use the one model. And this one parameter model takes that. And then they adjust it. And since 2015, the model. And the two parameters also the power of the question into account in differentiating between high and low ability students. Okay? So if you look at Tim, then it changed in 1999 to the 3-parameter model. And the 3-parameter model, in addition, takes children into account because you have multiple score questions. So the big question, does the choice of the item response model impact on the question, right? Or different item response scores. Do the league tables change? Does anything change on that? So before going into that, just to make you aware that there is growing literature discussing that item response models perhaps have probably problems that it would be worthwhile to reflect about. Okay, so there are two things I want to reflect on. First, does the league table position of a country change? And the second one is to talk about educational inequalities, which are very important for policies, right? So I looked at different sources I could find, and indeed the OECD PISA annex discusses that if you take exactly the same raw material data, you will have the same risk. The correlation of the proficiency score estimated across countries, between countries, so the country's average score is not 0.99. And also there's the paper by Jerome who uses 35 rich OECD countries also there. So the correlation is 0.33, so we can be very happy. The league table results won't differ. I did some past research looking at TIMSS 1995 and 1993, so comparing the item, the one parameter and the three parameter model. So for TIMSS 1995, you have for the same raw model, for the same raw data, both models, right? And you can see that the correlation, very similar, on the median, here it's the medium, is also very high. Also there, in TIMSS it didn't change anything either. So, however, you go back to item response modeling, but where item response modeling really matters is at the top and at the bottom of the achievement distribution. So the big question is, if we now want to know something about educational inequalities, how does it look like? So I looked in the OECD PISA report, and there's nothing said about this, that the item response model matters in some way, the distribution of educational inequalities. And Jerome, however, did this, and they found that actually it has no impact. However, be aware that they looked at the 35 rich countries. What if we take all countries into account? And this is this research that uses the TIMSS to change from 1 to 3 parameter model, no, not 1 to 2, but 1 to 3. And here you see that the correlation, this is exactly the same raw data, but you see that the correlation is rather zero, but for rich countries it's relatively high, okay? So it would be very nice to see something like that also for OECD, and having more information whether this should concern us or not. Okay. Another kind of measurement error is mode effects. I'm not quite sure whether you are aware that PISA changed from paper and pencil to computer assessment, right? So 58 countries changed, 15 stayed with paper and pencil. So we have some countries doing one kind of test. It's the same question, certainly, but they do it in a different assessment form, which we call mode. And what was a concern is that in some countries, the science scores, the average science scores have decreased a lot, and there are some people saying this is due to the different mode effects. So what did the OECD do? They collected pilot data where students were randomly allocated to the different modes, and hence these kind of data are available, and then they checked whether there are mode effects. They found some, and then they used a different item response model, plugged a factor in, so they take into account now that different items can have different mode effects. They do not take into account in the modeling now that different students from different socioeconomic backgrounds have different, differently have a different mode effect, okay? And they also don't take account that there might be country differences, okay? So this led to research, again, on this topic, one of them saying, so actually if you look at just 3 countries, Sweden, Ireland, and Germany, it seems like that the practice the OECD applied has reduced our error. There's still some kind of challenges, and if you just look at the paper on Germany that says the mode effect distorts it, then it's found for Germany. So that are the only 2 papers that I could find on that. So there's some, it's not completely clear, but the OECD does not provide any information by country on these different mode effects that could eventually lead to measurement error. Okay. Sorry. Okay, so this was the measurement side of errors. Now we go over to the representation side. So the target so let's start with the target population. Target populations, the population you want to examine is these are 15-year-olds in school, PISA. Okay? So PISA allows for exclusions, and there's some discussion about that. They say the maximum exclusion percentage is 5%, and these are students with special needs. There are a handful of countries that exclude more students, and that could lead to coverage error. We cannot quantify it because we do not have the data. Something which is not an error directly, but which derives from the choice of the target population is the following. Certainly, there's no question. The target population is a good choice. We want to know something about children and education systems, right? What you see here, that is the so-called coverage index 3, which I took from the PISA 2015 report. And you see that, for example, in Italy, only 80% of all 15-year-olds are covered, which is different to Finland and Germany, where almost 100% of students are covered. So if you just look at 2015 data, who cares? Nobody cares. And I mean, that's just how it looks like. We just look at students in school. However, the point comes when we look at trends analysis. So here this I took out of a nice paper by Spau. Here you see how this coverage changed over time. So you see in Germany not much happened, so we always at a similar level of target population coverage. But in Turkey, look at Turkey. So in 2003, only around 35% of kids were in school at the age of 15, and they were the basis of the achievement score, the country's achievement score in some way, or average achievement score for Turkey in 2003. Now look at the 2015 values, and it's something like 70%. So that is a good sign, right? The education system managed to drag in more students, right? That's really good. So, but what happened in Turkey, if you look now, if you compare the trends of Turkey over time, you will see that educational inequality increased and that the average education in Turkey declined. Is this now really reflecting the education system? No, not really, because so argument he makes, not really. What is happening? These kids who did not attend previously school, but unfortunately are now sucked up into the school systems, are those with low ability, right? And hence this leads to the trend of lower average ability over time in Turkey and a greater dispersion. So it's very important to think about, when you think about trends and compare over time, to be in mind if you work especially, again, with countries that are not as rich. OECD countries or something like that, or okay, so no, but poorer countries with not all pupils are in school, that this can distort the overall trend analysis. And this is also, if you think about for our European Commission, for our indice on the percent of 15-year-olds below PISA level 2. I mean, if you imagine that now in different countries, like in Italy and other countries which were relatively low on that, Austria, UK, other countries now manage to get more 15 system, actually the dispersion could increase again, and hence our measure on the percentage of 15 years old below level 2 could actually increase. But that could be actually a positive sign of the education system. So it's also, so in some way, that is something to consider. The choice of the target population, which is a pragmatic one, certainly, it hides a problem on people out of school, right? So, okay. The sampling error. So that is the error that we always conduct. I don't need to say anything about that. What about the non-response error? So the non-response error arises when values of statistics computed based only on respondents, if they are different. Okay. So imagine, so the non-response error depends on two different things. So the first thing is whether they is how big is the percentage of students that did not respond. Okay, and the second thing is on and the second thing is on the difference between them. Okay, so you can have something like a 50% non-response rate, but if the non-respondents and the respondents are exactly the same in the variable you are interested in, there's no non-response bias. Okay, and you can have a 5% non-response rate, and the non-respondents are completely different to the respondents. Then you have a non-response bias. Okay, so what do educational achievement organizers do? In some way, they need to do that. They set thresholds, but as I just explained to you, thresholds, non-response thresholds, do not really manage so well to do the job because it's a compositional difference between respondents and non-respondents that makes a difference. Okay? So what does PISA, for example, do? So it sets a threshold of 85% for school response. So if a country, and it sets threshold for 80% for students. So if a country doesn't meet this response rate, it's just not published in the report, like, for example, it happened with the UK in 2003. Okay? So what does PISA do in terms of non-response? It has the weights, the PISA weight that you're using corrects for the school non-response, right? Because there are stratification variables were used that can be, for that, hence it can be corrected for the school level. But it cannot, it only limited can correct for student response. It just takes a ratio of those students answering over those answering and not answering, okay? So in the past we did some study on non-response because we could merge the PISA data, this fantastic population data they have in England, which included all schools, all students within schools, so we knew which schools were responding and which not, and we knew what students responded and which not. And the result that we found was that school response doesn't really increase. School non-response doesn't really matter so much. What matters is student non-response. And I just show you here a result of that, where you see, for example, if you focus on reading, you see the design weight. So the design weight just takes into account that different students had a different probability of being selected. And then you see the correcting OECD weight, which doesn't change much, so the design result. And then we used generalized regression weights, taking this fantastic data we had into account. Okay, so we knew everything about population values. And you see that the non-response bias we measure here is 525 minus 510. So it is 15 points. I have to say that this is really a devil advocate's measure, because in England now the response rates went up, okay? But I show you this oldish paper, not because it's mine, but because there's nothing else for any other country I'm aware of that does a similar kind of research, and I do think it's possible to do that for many countries. So you see the non-response bias is something like 15 points. If you think that the standard error is around, I mean, you see it even here, it's 5. Yeah, the standard error is around 5. You see that the non-response bias is 3 times the standard error, so that is relatively good. You can also think about how far would England change in the league table position. So it would shift downwards by 3 places for reading and 4 places for science and math. So as I said, there are possible remedies. So this is something that if you look at the data, and you look at non-response rates in different countries, you can identify those where there's a lot of non-response. And hence, in some way, that shows you that these countries could move up or down the league table accordingly. So, but we don't know anything about it. So the possible remedies are, there are more and more countries that have administrative data available on students and schools. And there are many countries that have national test scores, which is what we need in order to do this analysis that are highly correlated with PISA. And hence we could do surveys like that. We could also adapt the survey design and the sampling that we use to the non-response pattern that we find. So just coming back to the England example. So if we had applied the nice weights so weights that take non-response and also coverage error into account, and if you put those in there, you see that the decline changes a lot. Okay, so it's still a decline, and it's still essential. But if you think that Tim's results showed something else and that the other estimates went into a different direction than PISA, perhaps the story is not anymore so convincing. So, okay, let me conclude by setting the scene. So education achievement surveys provide unprecedented opportunities. Some people, like me also, have built a career on them, and they are fantastic. You freely download them. You can do a lot of stuff with them. So they're highly valuable. That is not the point. They are highly policy relevant, right? So what is the point here is that given that they have this high policy relevance, we should really request high standards of transparency, on data creation, we should know whether the test designer's choices are robust to the results that we find. Okay? Good. So the errors in some way that I discussed here, most of them I cannot quantify, right? But they possibly could inflate the total survey error, okay? And as that, they could shape the results. We do not know much about the size of the possible errors, and hence it would be nice to know more about them. Okay. What could be the step forward? It would be nice to have more transparency on whether the results published are robust to the best test designer's choices. As I said, there would be, nowadays, we have fantastic administrative data. There is, for example, some research saying that we can measure all these errors if we merge administrative data with survey data. So there are now much more possibilities what we can do. I personally also think that the league table is perhaps not a very good way to present the results, and that it crowds out what I think are the very interesting results and possible research we can do about this PISA and other education achievement surveys. And I also think that it's on us as a research community to investigate these things further, as some people have fortunately done. Okay, this talk did only look at possible survey errors of PISA. I didn't discuss any errors in processing with the data or analysis errors, right? And given that the data are quite complex, these errors have been done in the past, and these are just some papers that discuss what errors we should probably avoid when we work with education achievement data. And the future outlook, okay, so at the beginning of this year, Andreas Schleicher said, we have to acknowledge that PISA is, at the moment, a powerful picture of what is important. And I think this is a very serious reply to critics saying, look, you only look at 3 domains and something else, so it would be good to cover more things. And indeed, there will be a future expansion test that will be looking at creative thinking and digital learning assessment. However, certainly the choice of these topics will be even more difficult to meet the challenges of being transparent and thinking about errors. So, thank you very much.
I think everyone will agree with me that was a fascinating talk. I use PISA data, and I know a lot more now than I did in the past. One specific question is, my understanding is that the schools should be sampled randomly within country, but I also understand that in China and maybe other countries, they're not, that the government chooses them. For obvious reasons. I wonder, do you know anything or have any comments about that?
No, I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, that's my...
I only know what's written in the report.
I mean, they're in... Well, it's Shanghai and Shenzhen or somewhere, I'm not sure, but I don't think it's a random sample.
Okay. I
suppose the general question is, how do we as researchers, those of us who deal with politicians or civil servants, you know, how do we convey to them that it's complicated? You know, that league tables, you know, for all the reasons you've discussed, that interpreting these things, because they just want a simple answer. Yeah. We've moved up in the tables. Or in Ireland, what's important is that we're ahead of Britain. You know, that's all we care about. And so I'm just wondering, just throwing it out generally, or how do you convey the complexity of things to policymakers?
You had promised me not to ask difficult questions. So I think this is the reason why everybody jumps on the league tables, right? Because it reduces the complexity, and hence it's very easy to do. So, and this is what policy makers need, right? They have already the complexity in some way of making these policies, and so that is what they want. So I think that the best thing is to is to give examples, perhaps like here, to make things very easy, to try to reduce the complexity of, look, if you look at this, but if it's, you know, the trend is like that, but if you take into account that there are possible errors, the trend might be like that. So there is, whatever I give you has some kind of error around it, which you need to take into account. No. Any other questions? Remember, you also had promised me not to ask difficult questions.
Indeed. I found the talk very, very fascinating. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is this working?
Yes.
Yep. Thank you. The issue that I'm interested in is the extent to which the students regard these as low stakes or high stakes tests. And you mentioned the Abu Dhabi thing, the Abu Dhabi example where they were being prepared for it. And I think that's quite pretty important actually, that you know, some countries they take it seriously probably, and other countries they don't. And that would be one, it's just a comment I suppose, but that might well have a big impact on it. The other comment I would make is that it's used in England also as kind of within country policy relevance. So completely spurious inferences are drawn from the differences between private school and state school performances on PISA. And misuses of the data are made quite frequently in public discourse, I'm sorry to say. So just to add that comment to what, I don't know whether that happens in other countries, but I mean, statistically stupid inferences are made frequently from the data, which is very, very frustrating.
So, thank you very much for your excellent talk. I just have a very simple question. Is you, as part of this European Commission, with UK or without UK, okay, do you think that they trust PISA when they make political decisions or not?
So I do think that people trust these figures. Otherwise you wouldn't see what is happening. You see that PISA is used for benchmarking.
Yeah, but that's it, OECD. I'm talking about the European Commission.
But this is also the European Commission, so they have the European Commission also. So I do think that there is a huge trust on the data, and I think this is also due to us as a research community. We use the data, we throw out results, we show if you increase the student score by 10 percentage points, your economy will grow by XX percentage, you know. You use PISA data for drawing these conclusions, certainly then we believe the data. And I think if we as a research community come out and say, oh, no, we always need to think about these kind of areas around it, so trends could be looking a little bit more, if we also as a research community come out a little bit more, then perhaps we can manage to discuss this a little bit more. But I also think a lot is about how OECD presents the results, right? I think if there were something like one report on possible limitations or a chapter where everything is put in one place, where you don't need to search through, but where all these kinds of things here are put so that people can read it, and then you could even show it, right? So here, look, we have these league tables, or in my opinion, we should go away from the league tables, but we have these country groupings, these are good and these are perhaps a little bit worse and stuff. And here's also the limitations behind these kind of things, and perhaps we could have a much easier go to explain that perhaps it's not completely trustable data, and that it can be, the single numbers can be abused. Any other questions?
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. Really, nice. Just one question. When designing the questionnaire, I believe the topics, the domains, what's the criteria, or what criteria do you think OECD follows to understand, especially what could be the competencies or the skills for the future? I don't know. Does that become relevant when assessing educational attainment in different countries? The topics, or trying to understand the competencies for the future, or understanding what topics, what domains, what's important. Because your last slide, I believe, you talked about creativity and digital. Yeah.
So what I find important personally, I think that's very difficult to say. I mean, I think how they come up with these topics is that different country representatives who conduct then also the surveys, they discuss what is quite important, and there's also the OECD has now global education agenda, I think they call it, 2030 or so, where they discuss that given globalization, and digitalization, new skills will be needed in the labor market, and hence they discuss what possibly could be the answers of school systems, and then I think they derive some of these kind of topics from that. Okay. No other questions? Okay, then thank you. You have a question? No? Okay. No, sorry. No, I thought it's you. Okay. Okay, thank you very much then.